something maybe, or find out what's going on. It's been a long delay. I know people are wondering, what are we doing? What's happening? Is anything going on? We've got some people here tonight that think can tell us that. But they've got a little glitch right now, and we're waiting on just a few minutes on them. I'd like to start the meeting by, like we usually done. If we've got a number of the people here on the steering committee, I'd like to let them say if they got anything they'd like to say since the last meeting. And I'm sure some of you people have some comments. I don't care whether they're negative. I don't care whether they're positive. And if you don't want to say anything, it's all right too. But I would like to hear your comments. So I'm going to start off down on the end down there. And if you've got any comments about what's happening or what you'd like to see happen,
no, other than I think the process has been a really good one. I've enjoyed that. And I just wish that somebody would come and get the landfill from Walter Hill. But the process has been good.
It's got a limited capacity. I think that's the best thing I can tell you.
Well, limited in terms of 2 years.
How much it'll hold.
That's what I was afraid of.
Next.
Well, maybe we can remind each other of names too while we're going around. I'm Mayo Taylor, and I thought the last session was quite good, and I particularly appreciated Will Jordan when he kind of said, well, when are we going to get to the hard stuff? So it sounds like maybe tonight we're going to start sidestepping at least towards it and have some good meetings.
And I'm Susan Allen, and I just think we're going along step by step, and tonight's going to be another good step forward.
Clarence Brandon, looking forward to a productive meeting.
Jake Durham, I don't have any comments.
I'm Jim Avewater, and I think we're getting real close to being on that part where we start to see stuff shape up and look pretty good, so I'm excited about that. Looking forward to this in the next meeting.
Lenise Patrick, and I'll just ditto everybody so far.
Mike Vaught, I'm looking forward to the meeting. I think I think it's coming together well. And I would say that Tim came and reported to the Planning Commission, and they wholeheartedly endorsed the progress we've made so far.
David Lee, just glad to be here.
Good afternoon. I'm Wayne Blair. I am a replacement for Doris Jernigan, so this is actually my first meeting with you, and been trying to catch up with some light reading that you've already provided. So.
Well, you'll probably hear enough from me tonight as is, so I'll just pass the baton, but I'd like to welcome Mr. Blair to the steering committee and thank him for joining the team, and look forward to his contributions.
I'm Michelle Kendall with Parsons Brinkerhoff. I don't have anything to add at the moment.
Randy Call with Randy Smith, and I'll ditto as you did.
I'm David Waldron. I'm glad y'all saved my seat.
David Penn from MTSU, and I'm going to be talking about Walter Hill tomorrow morning in my environmental economics class.
Do I need to attend?
No. It's just an whole exam.
I'm Elizabeth Emsley. I'm with the Rutherford County Planning Department, and just glad this is going forward.
Hey, I'm Tim Roach, Parsons Brinkerhoff, and now I'm like David, you'll hear enough from me in a little bit, but it's my fault we're waiting because I didn't bring the presentation with me. But it's coming across the wires now. Feel it.
Doug, you get done?
I'm Doug DeMasi with Rutherford County Planning. We're just glad we have such a great turnout tonight. Just want to thank all of you. You've all been so dedicated to this, and we do appreciate that. I know at the last Planning Commission meeting, I echo the comments that Will had made, Will Jordan, about when's the pain start. I know we're going to be faced with some difficult decisions and choices to make, but I do think that we can get through that. May not be able to make everybody completely happy, but at the same time, I think everybody in the process will see something out of it. So.
Well, I'm the last one. I've met with Doug about less than a week ago when I've talked to him. One thing I'm concerned about And whether I've got a reason to be concerned, I don't know. I don't think I do, probably. But I'm concerned about time. I think it's time to get started and do something. We've been about a year and a quarter, that much time attempting to do something, and I don't know whether I can see any progress yet. And I hope we can see some progress tonight. So bear with us is what I'm saying. Bear with Doug and the planning team. Let's see what they've got tonight, and hopefully we can get started on this thing. Doug, you got any other comments?
Not at this time. We're just, is this the right one?
It is, but it's a PDF, it's going to look strange.
Yeah, that'll work.
What if we do this?
Just cut down.
Y'all pretend this is a slideshow.
Just cut down the Zoom.
Let me say one other thing too. Any member of this steering committee, anytime that I'm up here talking, if you want to break in and say something, or got a question you want to ask, feel like you've got a comment needs to be asked, feel free to break into it and start to ask a question. I'll certainly recognize you. But I want it to be a democratic process. I don't want to feel like anybody's left out or ignored. So, Doug, I'm going to turn it back in your direction.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we're good to go. Okay, we're good to go now. I've gotten the grin from the consultant team, so we are ready to go now. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our consultant team. I guess who's leading? David Halfley is going to be leading off here, and we will go from there. Yeah, we need to hook. Are you just going to?
I'll just project my voice, and hopefully everybody can hear me. We'll put that on Tim if it's okay, and Tim's just a tad more soft-spoken than I am. Mr. Chairman, thanks for your introduction and for giving the members of the steering committee an opportunity to kind of weigh in tonight on where they think we are in the process. It's a long process and it's a complicated process, but we feel we are just about where we expect to be at this point. The county approved about a 2-year planning process, a little bit more than 1 year for the comprehensive plan, and then the balance of that for the development controls. Tim, if you back that up one, please. We're about where we expect to be, but things are going to get pick up at a brisker pace from now on, because we're going to have a lot more meaningful information to get into. Tonight we've got a number of things that we want to discuss with you. A brief update of where we are in the planning process under number 2 to let you know that we are on schedule, we're on track, what we're going to be doing. And if you all take a look at this graphic, you've seen it many times before. It's basically a 4-phase process. We are now right at the bottom of the blue box at the lower second from the left. We are developing now the alternatives and scenarios for different land use and development choices within Rutherford County. If you look at the entire process, it's about a 2-year process. We're about 9 months into it, and we're almost at the we're almost at the halfway point of the process. So we're just about where we expect to be at this point. We're going to develop the alternatives, come back very quickly in about a month with you all for a very intense working group with the steering committee. We'll talk more about that later on tonight. And then we'll start to get closer and closer to developing a preferred land use scenario for Rutherford County, flesh that out in the comprehensive plan, go through a very extensive public review process of the comprehensive plan, get that done late spring, right around summertime, and then immediately begin on the development controls, the zoning ordinance, and the subdivision regulation. So we're about 2/3 of the way through the comprehensive planning work. We'll wrap that up this spring, early summer, get right into the last green set of tasks on the right-hand side, and then put everything before the Planning Commission and the County Commission, we expect, on schedule and in a form where the steering committee can hopefully recommend it to the Planning Commission, the Common Council, and the citizens of Rutherford County. So we are where we expect to be at this time. Tim, just go back one time so I can touch on the agenda. That's number 2, the plan development process. Tim is going to talk briefly about what we've been doing since we've seen you last. I think there's oftentimes a understandable perception that if we're not here meeting with you, or if we're not showing up in the newspaper, that there's nothing occurring. And really, nothing could be further from the truth. Is we've got a great deal of activity going on behind the scenes, doing the work that we need to do in developing the plan. Our team, Dr. Penn, and others are working on the elements that we're going to be bringing back to you. So please do not feel that the absence of us before you is the same as the absence of effort on the project, because that's not at all true. We're very busy working on the project, and we'll start to get together in increasing frequency. Tim will talk a little bit about what we've been doing since we all met with you last. Dr. Penn from Middle Tennessee State University has been a part of our team from the start. His work now becomes very important because of the financial and fiscal implications of the various growth scenarios that we're going to evaluate. He's going to start that process tonight by presenting some of the work he's done in terms of the economic analysis and fiscal issues that he thinks the county is facing, and then we'll talk about what that means in developing the land use strategies in the comprehensive plan. We'll then collectively talk about what we're doing as the next steps, and particularly in terms of model development scenarios and scenario development, and then get a commitment from all of you to come back in about a month for a very intensive several-hour workshop to start to review some of the plan alternatives that our team is going to be preparing based upon the information you're going to give us tonight and the work that we have done so far to date in the process. So that's the agenda that we intend to cover tonight. Once again, it's not a presentation, but a discussion, hopefully. Dr. Penn is very interested in hearing your comments and questions and suggestions about his work, as we are as well. So don't be at all hesitant to throw up your hand and join in the conversation, because that's the way it will work best for the community. So with that, Tim, if you just kind of want to review briefly what we've been doing since we all got together last.
Okay, very good. Thank you, David. Is it on? Hello? Thank you very much. Let me see. I can project as well as David can. So we'll just go forward whether this is working or not. As David pointed out, even though we've not met as a steering committee since September, we've had quite a few things that have taken place over the fall, through the holidays, and then through the early part of this year. I think you recall we had our community meeting in October at, where did we have it? Rockville?
Blackman.
We went to Blackman. Okay. I was there. We had our community meeting to review the vision statement and the value statements that you all looked at, and the goals and objectives. I thought we had a very good community meeting, didn't you all? We had a good turnout, and we had a lot of good comments from folks, and you know, there were things brought up that we know are going to be issues carrying through this process, but I thought we had a really good turnout. Do y'all check the webpage? Do y'all look at the comprehensive plan webpage that Doug has under his planning department's site? If you get a chance, please do visit that, because we post everything to it. The last revisions to the existing conditions report were posted in December. I've got a few copies here. If you don't have a hard copy and would like one, I think Doug, you may have sent that out. I can't recall if you did, so you may have one. But I've got a few extras here. But the existing conditions report, we wrapped that up with the comments that we had received and have posted that online. The information from it will be brought into the comprehensive plan, to the draft of the comprehensive plan when we get to that point. From that, we also prepared a couple, and I did bring copies of these, some briefing papers or some summaries, really, of the information, the existing conditions report that we put under the headings of Rutherford today and Rutherford tomorrow. And what we did, I did this in sort of a, yeah, please, like a newsletter, bulletin kind of thing that if Doug wishes, could use this sort of format, on an ongoing basis and as a planning newsletter. But what we did was we did two separate reports from this. The Rutherford Today, we pulled out of the existing conditions report just some of the main findings, just a fact list with some graphics to kind of hit some of the high points or some of the big points from the existing conditions report. In the but it is Rutherford today, and Rutherford as it stands during our analysis. Rutherford tomorrow, this was an opportunity to take a look at some of the issues and challenges facing the county in the future, sort of the result of a SWOT analysis, if you know what that is, strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities assessment. And what it basically did was took the issues to consider, issues to address that we noted in the report, and put that in a format where those were all summarized together without all the other text. So we kind of have the today and tomorrow drawn from the same document, but broken out again to give different emphasis. In addition to that, as you all know, of course, we worked through the value statement and then the vision statement for the plan and the goals and objectives. We did get a very good reaction from the Planning Commission. I was very pleased to be there with them. I think we're going to County Commission next week to let them see this and ask questions if they wish. But again, I thought we had very good reaction from the Planning Commission. We very much support that and had some good questions from them. But those documents are posted online as well. And then I note in here that, again, during this process, there's a lot of activity that you don't see. We've been working very closely with the MPO of this area because, as you all know, we're taking a lot of information that they've already compiled and then some of the analysis that they've already put together in their modeling efforts, so that what we're doing is we're using the same software packages they are, the community-based software, to do the scenario modeling. And the end result, your selected preferred plan, we will provide the information back to the NPO so they can incorporate it into their planning activities. So there's been a lot of work back and forth between us here in Nashville, our folks from around the country that are working on this plan, with the local NPO on just data issues, the sort of thing that it makes my head spin listening to these people talk to each other. But there's some in-depth coordination that's been taking place, and we appreciate the MPO very, very much, and the coordination they've been and support they've given us. So since September, since you've seen us last, we have definitely been devoted to Rutherford County. And as David pointed out, we'll have some things now that happen at a little faster pace, and that really will require you all to work with us. And that's why this will be the first of a couple of actual working sessions, rather than, even though it doesn't appear that way now, rather than just having to listen to us talk. It'll be us asking questions and providing you information, and we're looking for information back. This is part of a two-step process, this specifically, this meeting is, to get us onto the scenarios. So again, there's been a lot of activity, and we're looking forward to now really engaging you all and in the analysis.
Thanks, Tim. This Rutherford County Today and Rutherford County Tomorrow is a really effective, very easy to read summary of everything that we've learned for the first 9 months of the planning process. And we would be happy to create more copies of this, a little higher quality so you can see the maps a little better. It's a great tool to communicate what the county is trying to achieve, the characteristics about the county that we've learned, and what that information means, and what they can expect from this steering committee and the county leadership in terms of where this process is going, what it's going to produce, why it's going to add value to the community. So this is the first 2 volumes of a little newsletter that we think really help track what this whole process is about, and we would encourage you to ask us for copies to take to your book groups or your churches or your community groups or just your friends, because this is a communication tool that we think is one of the best ways to get the word out about what the county is doing in this planning effort. This is complemented by the website and what's going on in Doug and Elizabeth's office and everything else. So please feel free to ask for more copies. We'll be happy to provide them and help continue to get the word out while we're in the plan formation phase of the work. Now, what we'd like to turn to next is to start talking about the economic and fiscal situation that we see happening in Rutherford County today. What are the trends? What are the implications for those trends? What's it mean for the future in terms of the plan we're trying to prepare? Dr. Penn from Middle Tennessee State University is our expert who's going to guide us and lead us in that phase of the process, because the comprehensive plan has to melt the fiscal and economics and the land planning and the development controls in a manner that is fiscally sustainable for the county and makes good sense from a comprehensive planning, from a growth management, and from a fiscal sustainability perspective. So we're starting now to integrate Dr. Penn's work into the process. I think he's going to start by giving us an overview of the document that he pulled together, which is now being distributed to the steering committee members and is also available to the public on the website. So Dr. Penn's going to make a few remarks, go over some slides, and then we're going to throw open the floor to questions and comments to talk about what this all really means. So with that, Dr. Penn.
Right, thank you, David. It's nice to be here tonight on this. I drove past the place once, but I think I got here on time. I've been here once before, but it's good to be here. And I would like to spend a few minutes talking about the work I did in the fall. You have the full report in front of you, so I won't go over this in great detail. Well, I think it's important that we start from the same information on how, at least my view on Rutherford County's overview. Well, as we know, Rutherford County is characterized by rapid growth. The growth rate has slowed down the last couple of years, but where hasn't it slowed down a lot? But it still remains the 13th fastest growing among the largest counties in the United States over the 2000 to 2008 interval. Largest counties meaning the largest 300 counties in the United States. There are 3,000 counties in the U.S., but it makes sense to compare us against the largest ones, to try to make a peer-to-peer comparison. And it seems to me that the three major attributes we have here are that we're attractive to commuters, it's a place to live, we're attractive for employers, it's a place to work, and we also have attractive educational opportunities at MTSU, the community colleges, and the public schools. A lot of localities in the United States would be happy to have one of those characteristics. I think it just kind of crystallized in my mind over the fall that we have all three here, and they're very important. Our population growth can be characterized as a hot spot within a hot spot. The Nashville MSA is the hot spot of population growth for the state, and Rutherford County is one of three hot spots of population growth within that Nashville MSA. And the MSA generated about half of Tennessee's population growth, 2000 to 2008. That's way beyond its share of the level of population. And Rutherford County's share of the MSA population rose then more than other counties in the 2000s. And you can see Rutherford County there in the, looks like it's, what is that shade? Mango, no. Oh, it's a little bit blue. Blue-green, let's call it blue-green. It's increased enormously in 1990, from 1990 or 2000 to 2008. And you can see the numbers have increased, the levels increased, and the share has increased also. Davidson County has grown, but not much, really, in the 2000s. The big growers have been Rutherford County, Williamson, Sumner, and the other counties haven't grown nearly as much. Thank you. But we're pretty familiar with that. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's helpful to think of not just one Rutherford County, but a consolidation of three counties. Three characteristics that are important. Suburban Rutherford with the commuters, industrial Rutherford with our manufacturing base, and campus Rutherford with MTSU and the educational base we have. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time on these. About a third of the people who are working, who live in Rutherford County, work in other counties, mostly in Davidson County. Of course, the proportion is higher in Laverne and Smyrna because they're closer to Davidson County, to the working centers, and a little lower for the unincorporated areas. So the proportion is lower for the unincorporated areas, but the raw number of people is higher in the unincorporated areas. And unincorporated, I mean the area in the county not in one of the major cities, Laverne, Smyrna, Murfreesboro, so on. Okay, so what's the implication here? The demand for housing in Rutherford County is not just sensitive to our own population, our own employment growth, but it's sensitive to employment growth in the commuting destinations in Davidson County and to a lesser extent other counties. And here's the details on table 1. This is right out of your report, where it shows we have a little more, the number of commuters is a little higher in the rest of the county outside the major, the primary cities, even though the ratio, the percent of commuters is a little lower in that area. So commuting is very important everywhere, but it is very important also in the unincorporated areas. Now for industrial Rutherford, and this struck me also, I didn't realize this until I started looking into it. Well, we knew we had a very important large manufacturing base, but what I didn't know that this is pretty unusual for a suburban county. In fact, I started checking this out. I looked at the top 300 counties, and manufacturing intensiveness to me means the ratio of manufacturing payroll and total payroll is my measure of manufacturing intensiveness. So we have a lot of our payroll in manufacturing. And if you rank the 300 largest counties in the United States from highest to lowest manufacturing intensiveness, we rank 7th highest in terms of the amount of payroll in manufacturing out of total payroll. And if you narrow that down to just the suburban counties, the large one, we rank 2nd. There's only one other county that has more manufacturing payroll as a percent of total payroll than Rutherford, and it's also a suburban county, and I think it's a county in the Cleveland area. I may mention that in the report, but they're in Cleveland someplace. So this struck me as very unusual. Now, even though we have this manufacturing intensiveness in the 2000s, we saw more of our job growth shift away from manufacturing into the services sector. Even though we pretty much maintained our level of, well, we lost some manufacturing jobs, but our level of payroll has maintained pretty well. But the growth in new jobs has shifted away from manufacturing into the services sectors. Some parts of the services sector pay well, like in healthcare, but other parts don't. They pay less, such as retail and food service. For the third type of Rutherford that I looked at, what I call campus Rutherford, MTSU, the number of students we have on campus is growing by leaps and bounds over the last year or so, up to 25,000 now. When the economy was going well, our enrollment growth rate was down, a little lower than we expected. That's because there were alternatives to going to school. You could have a job that paid pretty well and not going to school. Or you could choose to not return for a while and try to build up your income and a job. These days, there are fewer job opportunities, so the opportunity cost of not going to school is lower, and you have more students stay in school. You have more students trying to finish their education, or more students trying to obtain a graduate degree. And according to our work, 42% of these students live in the county, so adding to the demands for housing, but also adding to the sales tax base and to the property tax base. Okay, and I identified 4 issues that I think are important for the county. These are on my list. You may have a different list. I'd be interested to hear from you whether this corresponds with what you're thinking also. Number 1, income growth is still growing slowly, more slowly than the other large counties in the United States. Now we have the Gateway Project and Destination Rutherford who have helped to turn that around a little bit, but this still is an issue for our county. This is important, especially to the cities and to the county governments, because income growth drives sales tax collection growth, which is important for pay for services in schools. The schools get to half of the local option sales tax revenue, and the city and county governments are dependent on the other half for operating expenses. Okay. Number two, maintaining school quality while accommodating student growth. In the 2000s, from 2000 to 2008, enrollment growth is up 43% in the county. How much was it up in Tennessee overall? 5.6. That is just an incredible number to me, that ratio. Just how much growth has occurred here compared to the growth of the school population in Tennessee. As we know, here's the rates of growth over the last 8 or 9 years, and only 1 year did we grow around 3%, 3.3%. That was in 2001. Some of those years up 5%, higher than 5%. In 2008, it was down about 4% when the state grew almost none at all. Right. So, last two issues, retail development. The recent retail development in the Avenue and particularly in the Smyrna area have helped to cushion the effect of the lower sales, lower income, higher unemployment impact on sales tax collection for the county. The county did see a decrease, but not as much as other counties like Williamson or Davidson saw. And we attribute that to the increase of the sales tax base in the retail and food service establishments to help capture some of that spending, keeping it here in Rutherford County and not in other counties. So some of this impact has been at the expense of other counties. All right. But the caveat here is that virtually all, I'd say 98% of these sales of retail and food service occur within the city limits in the county. Now, the county schools, again, get half of the local sales tax, local option sales tax revenue. The other half is split depending on where that food service or retail establishment is located. And most of those are within the city. So the county government general revenue doesn't get a lot of benefit from this. Fourth issue, managing housing growth. It surprised me also that during the 2000s, part of our housing growth was, of course, due to people moving into the county, but also a significant share of our housing growth was due to lower household size. We had fewer people per household. If you look at the figures, the number of housing units during this period grew faster than population grew. Well, the only way to explain that is that you had a lower household size. People were encouraged to form new households. People were encouraged to move away from home into apartments, into their own houses, and that helped spur part of the population growth. Now that's turned around, and we're going the other direction now. Household size is starting to go up. Why? They found out, well, can't afford to live on my own anymore. How many people have had kids move back in, live with them, or have your kids moving in with other people to live because they can't afford to live on their own anymore. So we're not going to see a boost in growth from that, I don't think, for a few more years. I think the housing growth rate and household formation rate is going to decline back to closer to what it was in the early 90s. That plus higher mortgage rates that I think are coming. I mean, we're not going to see another mortgage rate this low probably in my lifetime, I don't think. So these two things are unlikely to cause the housing growth rate in Rutherford County to go back to the way it was between 2002 and 2007. Although it's going to be higher than the other counties around here and higher than the state average, I don't think we're going to return to those breakneck growth trends that we saw in the mid-2000s. And that concludes my overview. And if you have any comments or questions, there's quite a bit more detail in my report that I'll refer you to. And you may have other issues that you would want to make sure we take into consideration.
I have a question.
Yes.
Thinking about the decreasing family or household size, is that probably directly attributable to the baby boom generation? Their offspring are now at the age where they're buying houses, And then you said the household size is increasing. Maybe the offspring are having offspring. Could that be?
Well, I think the demographic part of that probably hit the market in the middle 80s or so, or maybe the late 90s. I think what really spurred the smaller household size was the new financial instruments we had, the subprime mortgages, the Alt-A mortgages, the interest-only mortgages. All these opportunities to go out and buy a house were abounding. So I think it's more financial innovations than anything. And of course, those financial innovations aren't around anymore.
Thank goodness.
Going the other way.
David, I have a question. If I saw that correctly, it seemed like the student population was growing at a faster rate than the general population on an annual basis. Now, does that mean that more families, the families that are living here, are having more children rather than families with children moving in here? Is that a
I think it's
fair
probably the
comparison?
latter. I don't think the birth rate is a lot higher than other counties, although I haven't really looked at that. But it would have to be hugely higher to generate that kind of growth. It has to be that families are moving in. Families would define as parent with child are moving into the county.
It seems like they would move up together then, at a uniform rate, wouldn't it, rather than one moving more than the other?
Well, maybe they have maybe they have big that's a good, interesting question. It depends on, I guess it depends on the size of the families. Is it 2 kids? Is it 3 kids?
Well, and also the age, obviously. Families with school-age children I mean, the school-age children themselves are what you're tracking in the public school enrollment, whereas a family might also include people who are not of school age. You would get
They're not
beyond
in
the
those
school age. So, I mean, there's
That's just public.
it would appear that of the families that move and relocate into the area, those with the school-age children tend to locate here. But I see what you're saying about the total population numbers themselves, but maybe we'll read the numbers and see if there's a way to parse out some of the age distribution there.
There'll be other opportunities throughout the process, particularly when we get into the next step, which is developing scenarios to evaluate. One of the critical factors in evaluating different choices for going forward will be the fiscal implications of the choices that we make with respect to land use and development, or conservation and development, and various iterations of how we plan for land uses in the future. Looking at Dr. Penn's comments, there's some major dots, it appears, that are possible to connect. There are 3 very strong attributes that he has identified that have been the major drivers of much of the growth that Rutherford County has experienced over the last 20 years. The attractiveness to commuters, attractiveness to employers, and also to the excellent educational opportunities in the county. That has created a couple of the other characteristics, which is we're the 13th fastest growing county in the United States, and the preponderance of that has been in residential growth, I would expect. And also that the county has an excellent representative amount of industrial employment that provides a good income for the county and provides employment for the citizens. So the next piece of the equation that we like to look at is based upon where we are population-wise, the growth that we've experienced, and the type of growth that is, what are the costs that the county is incurring as a consequence of the growth that we are experiencing? Because a major factor in this analysis must be, do we have the fiscal capability to support the type of land use plan that we want for Rutherford County? And we don't have any specific information about the cost of different land use types for Rutherford County. However, there have been 3 recent studies done in Middle Tennessee by the American Farmland Institute that have been paid for by TASSER, which is a commission of the state of Tennessee, and they have established a pretty strong trend or pattern in terms of what different types of land use cost in terms of the revenues that they produce and the expenditures that they require. And this is very important information for us to understand because it gets to the heart of the planning that we're going to be doing. So let's just take a minute and look at what that case study in Robertson County had to say. And there's also been done one for Blount County, and also
Tipton County.
but they also really, they all say the same things, and they all reach the same conclusions in terms of the patterns that they reveal to us. So, if you look at Robertson County in the study that was done recently, what was the purpose of the study? They were trying to evaluate the what the net fiscal impact is on land uses in the county. That's very similar to what we're trying to do here in this planning effort. They did that by examining the revenues, money that comes in by different land use types, and the demands that they make on public services. How much you get from a land use activity versus how much it costs to support that land use activity. Because you obviously don't have a sustainable situation if your expenditures are consistently higher than your revenues. That will lead to diminished services, higher taxes potentially, etc. And finally, we wanted to break it down even further, or this study did, and looked at what are the costs of providing these services to 3 different types of land uses, the ones that are probably of the most concern in this planning process, and that is residential, commercial, industrial, and then farmland activities. So that was the purpose of the study, and while this county is not exactly like Rutherford County, there's broad areas of commonality that we can take lessons from. The findings, let's look at the revenue side first. 82% of the revenue in 2005 in Robertson County was provided by or generated by residential uses. That's possibly even a bit higher here in Rutherford County because Robertson County is a slightly less urbanized county than this county is, and the residential revenue may be slightly higher in this county even than it is in that county. But you can see that the preponderance of revenue was generated by residential land uses. Not surprising. A smaller percentage was generated by commercial and industrial land uses. And then finally, an even smaller percentage appropriately was generated by farm and forest land uses. So that's where the revenues are by land use category for a roughly similar county to Rutherford County. Let's look at the expenditure side. Residential uses residential uses provided 82% of the revenue. They consumed 96% of the expenditures. They cost more than they contribute. Industrial uses and commercial uses contributed 16%. They cost, in terms of expenditures, 3% of revenue against expenditures. And farm and forest lands provided only modest revenue in terms of 2% of total revenues, but they only took 1% of the expenditures. So the highest land use category revenue producer, residential, provided the most money back in terms of 82%, but it also required the most expenditures, and those expenditures were in excess of the revenue that it produced. This is important in terms of how we think about land use planning in Rutherford County, because residential growth continues. It's been a very rapid growth. I think Dr. Penn illustrated that it's going to slow for a lot of different reasons, but in terms of a economically sustainable model for growth, it costs more than it produces, and we have to be aware of that as a planning issue as we go forward with this process. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Related to that?
Go back if you will, Tim.
Back to that, the residential, did it matter the type of residential, and did it matter the tax, the property tax cost or charges or however, whichever way? Did that impact the amount of expenditures versus the?
That's a very good question. Tim, do you recall that?
No, I believe they grouped all the residential classifications, grouped all the residential classifications together. So no, there was not an attempt in that study to break it down by, say, multifamily versus a single family.
Or the size of the homes or the cost of the homes?
Well, those would be reflected because the revenues they're talking about are the property tax revenues. So size and value comes into play indirectly just in the assessment of the home.
And although they didn't address it in these studies, I know that I have seen studies before where there is kind of a, depending on the tax rates, kind of a break-even point where the higher the cost of the house, the more property taxes are going to generate. So there is a point where the houses will start to pay for themselves, but it's at a very high level and it's not sustainable across a whole county if you're looking to provide a mixture of housing choices. So there is a correlation, yeah.
And multifamily, is taxed at a 40% of assessment, and a single family is at 25% of the assessment value too. So that would affect your number.
Let's look at the next slide then. And again, this is Robertson County, but a similar analysis was done for 2 other counties in Middle Tennessee, and one which was very similar to Rutherford County in terms of how mature the development market is, what are the types of land uses that are represented. The implications are pretty self-explanatory. For every dollar in revenue from residential, Robertson County spends $1.15. Now, we looked at a couple other counties in Blount County. Blount County, it was $1.25 cost for every dollar of revenue it produced. And in Tipton County, it was slightly
about $1.03 or $1.05.
But you can see where the trend is that generally speaking, the expenditures to support that land use type are higher than the revenues that land use type produces. There are differences, and this county was just about in the middle. Industrials, it's a very different story. For every dollar of revenue from commercial and industrial properties, the expenditures are quite low, 20 cents. And for each dollar,
that's the same as
that's
one.
the same one. Okay, I apologize. That's the same one. So you can see where the costs of services by land use type is a fairly well-established relationship within the counties in Middle Tennessee. Next slide, please. Residential development contributes the largest amount of revenue, by far, of any land use type in Robertson County. At the same time, it creates an annual deficit in costs over revenues of $13 million annually. Commercial and industrial uses generate surplus of revenue over costs, and agricultural lands and open space also pay more in taxes than they demand in services. Again, this has implications for this county because of the incredibly rapid rate of residential growth that you have experienced in the last 20 years. And the trajectory is clear in that we're developing in a manner that is not paying its way with respect to the revenues it produces. And that gap has to be filled by some manner, whether it be on the service side or on the tax side. Susan?
Is the main generator of that deficit schools? Because residential has children, but industrial does not?
That's all broken down in the report in terms of what those drivers of expenditures are, and we've got copies of that report that we can certainly make available to.
But that's certainly where Robertson, even though Robertson's a much smaller county population-wise than Rutherford, schools make up the majority of their budget there as well as they do in most counties. So, yeah.
The purpose of this information is to help us all understand that the decisions we make about growth and development and conservation and preservation, they're not good or bad intrinsically. They are decisions that we have to make with informed choices and understand the consequences of those decisions, because it's the consequences of those decisions that are going to impact the citizens of the county and our continued attractiveness to employers and students and folks who want to live in the county. But we have to have our fiscal house in order to be able to remain in balance in all manners. The final slide, I think, is also helpful to understand. There's a number of kind of rules of thumb out there or myths that people feel about land use and development. I think the information helps shed some light on those in ways that we haven't understood before. Oftentimes, open lands, agricultural lands, and forest lands are seen not for their intrinsic value as resources and assets to a community, but they're in some sort of a transition phase between undeveloped and developed land uses. What this suggests is that that's an inaccurate characterization, and they provide not just intrinsic value and community value, but they have revenue and expenditure benefits by existing in the first place, and it's just not a path to the highest and best use, because the highest and best use may create development, but that development may come at a cost to the taxpayers of the county. I think we have to understand that. Another myth is that more of the same will get us a different result. And I think what we've learned in Rutherford County is almost nobody is growing faster than we are across the national landscape. And even with the rapid residential growth that this has experienced, the net is that you still spend more to support it than you do in terms of revenue it produces. So simply doing more of the same thing is not going to close that gap. And I think that says we have to be smarter about the way that we think about land use choices, because more of the same will not produce different results fiscally. And finally, the third point, maintaining high growths of residential development will not have negative consequences on county taxes. That relates to the second one, that if we continue to grow as we've grown in the past, there's not going to be a bill to pay in some respects at some point, because services are related to revenues and expenditures, and if we are going to have a higher demand for services, we have to have the revenues to be able to pay for it. And that means a balanced land use strategy that has many different land uses contributing to the community growth in terms of the money we need as well as the kind of community we want to be. And we will look to this information to help the work that we do in developing scenarios, because the scenarios on different strategies that we develop, one of the measures will be, what does this cost versus what it will produce? What does it add in terms of character and quality to our community versus how it will change our community? And those are some of the main factors that we'll look at in examining and testing different models of going forward. but this is a helpful bit of information to know about what are the real fiscal implications of the different land uses that are occurring in our county and Middle Tennessee at this time. I mean, it's all have the same information in terms of what land uses produce and what they cost.
David, if I could just
Yeah.
real quick, just interject something. You know, after seeing all this, of course, we don't want to give the impression to anybody that, you know, residential growth is not important in the community, because it is. You know, I just reiterate what David said just a moment ago. It's just having that balance that's important. You know, without residential growth, of course, you know, you don't have the employees and everything that you need for those other industry and business. So that is a very important aspect of this. It's just important to have that balance at the same time. So I just wanted to.
That's how it all is summarized, really.
I've got two questions. I presume all the sales tax is included in the commercial side of the formula, since you said the residential is just property tax.
I would expect so, yes.
So that would not apply any of the sales tax generated from the construction of that house towards the residential growth, which would kind of skew the lines towards the commercial. And without the 250,000 people, you know, commercial generally trails residential. And now that we're at a 250,000 population, I would think we would be more attractive to commercial growth than we have previously. So that would be something that we could tap into going forward, that we can attract commercial, like the Avenues and like Target on Sam Ridley. We can attract more commercial now that we're on a different radar screen at 250,000 than we were at 200,000. And with Murfreesboro being 100,000 people, we're on a different radar screen than we were at 70,000. So both of those should, you would think, by nature, if we set an attractive presence for commercial, then we would grow in that direction a lot more than otherwise.
Well, and I think that plays in well into Dr. Penn's research, where he showed that one of the issues facing the county for the future is trying to develop your retail base, because yes, you've got the obvious residential growth. We have an unusually high amount of manufacturing employment and capacity, but the retail and that sales tax producing segment has lagged. Well, obviously the 249,000 people in Rutherford County buy their retail products somewhere, so there's some leakage taking place, probably in Davidson and as well as some in Wilson and
Williamson.
And Williamson, of course.
Yeah.
So I think that what you're saying is very true, and it goes back to what Doug says, trying to, maybe the balance has been so heavy on residential that we are missing that retail and service component, and along these general trends, when you've got a category of land use activity like retail and industrial that returns 5 times, you know, it gives back $1 for every 20 cents, as opposed to residential that's a 110%. You know, there's a way you can balance back a little more retail expansion and employment opportunities in the county, returns a whole lot more for that dollar in services than the residential does. So that balance, that's kind of what we're talking here, is kind of rebalancing the mix.
Well, can I say something that's a pet peeve of mine? Smyrna and Laverne have both put impact fees on commercial and industrial. And I was in meetings when both of them chose to put impact fees on. As a builder, I said, put it on us as builders, but please don't hurt our jobs and don't hurt our sales tax. And evidently it fell on deaf ears. And if you're getting 5 times what's generated on commercial, I don't know why you would put an impact fee on commercial or industrial. It just blows my mind that you're killing your jobs and you're killing your sales tax. And an impact fee, I pulled like statistics when I presented mine, and I don't have those any longer, but like, if you put an impact fee the size that Smyrna did on Walmart, it can be, I think, recouped in 5 years. Why would you kick them in the teeth when 25 years from now, it's still going to be generating money? You know, and the Kroger that is in Nashboro Village was supposed to come to Laverne, and Laverne chose to put impact fees on commercial, so they went across the county line. It does not make any sense to me, so I'm just on my soapbox, sorry.
Well, I mean, and that's a very valid comment, because again, part of this process toward the end will be looking at some of the tools that the county can use. So that's red flag.
One more comment about this information. The Planning Commission approved a set of goals and objectives for the comprehensive plan. And the goals and objectives, they're hard to argue with. They are very forward-thinking, and they anticipate what the county could be in a number of years, and they give us a community to aspire to. That's important, that's good to have. Getting there is a more complicated proposition, and it's land uses, and it's infrastructure development, and it's public services, and revenues and taxes. And I think that we have to keep our eye on the fiscal side of the house when we do our land use planning, because we want to set up a model that does all that we can do, and that is achieve the goals that have been set out, create the kind of community that you articulated in the goals and objectives, but also create to keep our fiscal house in order. So when the group that is sitting here 25 years doing the third iteration of the comprehensive plan, they are building that plan off of good land use planning and sound economics and fiscal decision making, that we have built a strong foundation for the county to continue to grow and continue to prosper. And that means residential and commercial and industrial, with areas of agricultural and open space. And like any situation like this, the devil is in the details, but the devil is in the specific land use recommendations that have to come out of this planning process. And that is the work that you and we are all charged with. I just want to make sure that we keep an eye on both sides of the ledger as we make these decisions on behalf of the citizens of the county. Now, the information that we develop in the scenarios, we'll look at even a larger number of, what do you characterize them to? Factors, indicators, measures of effectiveness that will look at Plan A. Here's the measures of effectiveness we think are important. Here's how well this alternative stacks up against those measures. Here's Plan B and here's Plan C, so we can see very intuitively and analytically, if these are the things that we say are important, how does this plan alternative match up to that? And then we can evaluate them based upon good decision-making tools, which is information and data that have to drive a comprehensive plan like this. So it's not just reaching out there in the blue sky in terms of what we all want this place to be. That's not planning, that's dreaming, and we're here to put a good, solid, comprehensive plan together. And we need to have good data to be able to do that, and this is what we're doing at this part of the process. Comments, questions?
I think we all know good planning. If you're going to take a trip, you go build a house, anything you go do, if you plan it right, you save money. And I think that's what we have to. We don't have to go back and do something 5 or 10 years from now that we should have done today. I think it'll save money in the long run. And make a better house and make Rutherford County better. For some reason, Rutherford County has been better. It still is better. Our schools are a little better, thanks to our school system. That's why we're attracting people. A lot of people are attracted here to retire. And we like those type of people. I know several that retired in Rutherford County that living here. They're my age. they're paying more money back than the county's giving them. Yes. They don't have any children in school, and it costs the county a whole lot less. And so that's the kind of people we'd like to have, the ones that retire here or past my age even. So if we do a little planning, I think we can. It's just like if you're building a road. If you don't plant it, and it just runs wherever it happens to fall, then you got to turn around and straighten the curves out and build the bridges over. So if you plant it right, you'll have a road that'll last twice as long as it would if you have to go back and redo it 3 or 4 times.
Lanisha, do you have a comment?
I had a question actually for Dr. Penn. In looking at population and jobs, did you see how we compare to other counties in the Nashville area and others in the top 300 for the ratio between population and jobs, or workers, actually, this is what I should ask, between the number of workers that we have here and the jobs that we have available to those workers? It kind of gets a little bit at the balance between commercial and industrial and residential.
You mean the employment population ratio? Is that what you're talking about? No, I didn't really look at that. I'd be surprised if there were some big differences. It may be a little lower here than it would be in Davidson County, where you have more family members working in a family than here.
Or maybe I asked it wrong. The ratio between the workers and the jobs that are here, not the percentage of the population that works, but the percentage, how many jobs there are for each worker, or how many workers there are per job.
The unemployment rate, or you mean how many jobs we have compared to how many commuters we have? How many jobs we have for people living here, and the jobs are here also?
Yes, how many jobs we have for people who live here and work somewhere?
Well, we have about a third of our working population as commuters, and that ratio is coming down, though. We are building up the employment base, so we are moving the direction of more towards the direction of you live here and you work here too, but we still have a lot of commuters. In terms of the ratios, we're up there with Williamson and Wilson, Sumner. But I think the trend is we have a lower commuter ratio than we did a few years ago.
Even if you add in the job, the commuters that are commuting into the county for a job, we're still at somewhat of a job deficit, right?
No, I'm not even looking at the commuters or the folks who come in here for jobs. I'm just thinking about the folks who live here.
I think she's asking about the total number of jobs versus total number of workers in the county.
And one of the things that you look at in this sort of discussion is the jobs to housing balance. Is something that's commonly tracked through scenarios and through scenario development as well. And I think you're getting to a point that I wanted to get to in this discussion, and that is, what are some specific measures of economic health, and then it gets to commuting health and the ability to travel on the roadways, that we can try to build into these scenarios and track across the alternatives. And that jobs housing balance is one of the things that's commonly looked at. I know transportation planners look at it, especially because it gets into working with the transportation network.
When you think about how you might have residential growth but kind of reduce the cost of the residential growth, if you have better jobs to go along with those newcomers, then you've got those jobs are part of a tax-paying industry of some kind in the county, paying property taxes and maybe collecting sales taxes. And also, if you have the larger portion of your population that isn't commuting somewhere else to work, the lower your transportation costs are and so forth, and that's another government expenditure as well.
Well, certainly, the less opportunity for sales tax leakage if they're not crossing that county boundary.
I was just going to say, we had done a little bit of this on the second page of the Rutherford County Today, and I think we can expand a little bit, which will kind of get at what you're asking, Lenise. We were looking at where do we work, and we had statistics on what number of people live in the county and work outside versus those that come in. So I think we have the numbers for the jobs, and I think we'll pull a little bit together and we can get at what you're looking at, the kind of comparison between how we stack up against the other counties.
And I wonder, I mean, we've kind of looked at this kind of thing at where I work, but, and I don't know whether you can get at this level of detail, but can you look at, drill down farther in and see what kind of jobs those are and what they pay? One of the things that you pointed out, Dr. Penn, was that we may not be doing as well compared to other counties in that top 200 or 300 or other counties in the area in terms of our income growth or our household per capita income growth. Does that relate to the kinds of jobs that we are creating here? Or, you know, and is there something that we can do in this planning process to help deal with that issue?
Those are questions to be answered. Yep, I would say at this point, yes and yes.
Well, let's talk next about the scenario development and analysis process. And Tim, can you start that discussion, please?
Okay. This is where we want to start to get into being able to put what we've been talking about into as quantitative a format as possible, so we can start to work with our folks who are going to be building the land use models that will test the scenarios for us. One thing about scenarios that I've become more familiar with as I've been working more with your information and then with the MPO itself is in building these scenarios. We do want to. We're looking at what the MPO has already done simply because they've initiated a particular process using some particular software and then some methods for gathering and reporting data that I think would serve us best to try to be consistent with as much as possible so that we can communicate with their data very efficiently, which has given us a great advantage so far in the work we've done because they've crunched some numbers and they've already put data in certain formats that we can take and work for our purposes. We want to be able to speak back to what they're doing. At the end, we want to be sure that your plan, we can pull information out of it as time goes on, as the MPO develops their long-range transportation plans, as you look at projects in Rutherford County, that the data we have speaks well to what the MPO is doing so that you can efficiently plan out your projects. But we also want to be able to create the scenarios that are, the thing about scenarios as well is they're not really so much predictions of the future as so much a set of conditions that you place, you feed into the modeling, and you compare the different scenarios against each other based on those measures that we'll need to build on or to establish. Those are the things we test. As we run one scenario, we test its effect on our list of measures. We run the other scenario, test its effect on our list of measures. Well, how do we develop those measures? That's where we'll go back to the goal process, the goals and objective process. We didn't just go through that exercise for naught. It's to help us establish those things that are important to you all that we can then translate into these measures that the scenarios will then test. Because we want to not only establish goals, we want to further them. We want to see that the goals can be implemented, which ones can be implemented specifically through a scenario. So what I want to do here is walk through some of the information that the MPO has already been working with several counties on taking what they've done for the region and taking it down to a smaller level. Now, they're working with 3 particular counties. They're calling it their Tri-County Land Use Study, and they're looking at Wilson, Sumner, and Robertson. And so they've already been through a process with that steering committee that's still going on. I mean, they're still in the development stages. They're a couple steps ahead of us because they started this earlier, and they've already been through some of the initial steps you go through in just setting the correct terms and getting things ready for the models. I've learned more about modeling than I ever want to know, but it's fascinating how the things that planners have been doing for years now are quantified and run through these computer simulations, and it's really going to be pretty cool when you see some of the results that we'll be able to produce. But what I want to do is take you through a little bit of what has already been looked at in this region in terms of terms and themes of the scenarios. The point of each scenario is that it has a theme to it or a focus to it. And it needs to be, the different scenarios need to really be pretty distinct from each other, so that when you run the numbers and compare it against your measures, that you get the impact of it. Now, in the end, we may come back and select parts and pieces from scenarios and put them together, but I think as we set up the initial ones, they need to be pretty distinct enough for the numbers to test. Part of doing that will be, and first is looking at the county as a whole, and with most planning studies where you have a large geographic area, you have to break the thing down into chunks. Areas, sub-areas, if you will, to aggregate data and compare it against each other. Compare the various sub-areas against each other, but also it's just a convenient way to report data. If we start with the county as it is, obviously we could go down to the parcel level. I think that would be inefficient and it would take forever. There are 90-something thousand parcels, aren't there, Elizabeth? In Rutherford County, as she well knows. So it's impossible to track things at the level we're doing at a comprehensive plan down to parcel level. But there's a building block of the geographic area called a TAZ, Traffic Analysis Zone. And transportation planners use these geographic units on the ground to test their transportation plans, to test their models. Rutherford County has a series of TAZs, and they're the blocks underneath the background there. I believe that needs to be our base building unit, our base building block in the county, simply because the information has already been gathered at that level. The MPO has pulled together and reported their population numbers and their employment numbers at the TAZ level. That's another advantage, I believe, in working with the MPO in partnership with them. They have already developed a series of projections, population projections and employment projections for different time periods going out to, I believe, 2040.
Can I interject for a second here, Tim? If anybody isn't familiar, we're kind of using an acronym and talking about an organization that we might want to make sure that everybody's familiar with it. You know, I used to work there, so I know what it is, but, and we coordinate with them a lot. But it's probably important at least to bring it up. The MPO is the Nashville Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. They are a regional transportation planning organization. Rutherford County is part of it, of course, and stop me if y'all know this, if I'm telling you something you already know, but Davidson County, Rutherford County, Sumner County, Wilson, and parts of Robertson and Murray County. Williamson as well. So it brings everyone together, all of the cities and the counties, the DOT, federal highway. So we plan kind of comprehensively for the transportation needs in the area. As you know, the roads don't stop at the county boundary. So they kind of make sure that as you're developing your land use plans and your roadway plans, that there's some sort of correlation so that the people commuting into Rutherford County have a good way to get in, to get around Rutherford County as well. When Tim's talking about the modeling that they do, what they do is they determine, okay, how many people and employees are in each geographic area, which is the TAZs that he's talking about, and what roads do they use. And they also look into the future, what roads are they going to use, where are the people going to live, and where are they going to work. And that's really important because the better handle you have on that, one of the important things about the MPO is that they have money for road projects, and money is always important when you have limited revenue coming in. There's a variety of different sources, so they have the ability to share for the highest priority regional projects to be able to be funded. So as you're doing this plan, and one of the reasons why we're feeding it back into their model, the better the information we can get back to them in a format that they understand, the better the planning shows up on the roadways. So that if we're looking at 2025, 2030, 2015, what are the impacts and the volumes going to be on these roadways, they can best identify in their model, oops, this shows up, the level of service is really bad, we need to make some improvements. They have money to make those improvements, so that's kind of an important correlation about why we're really working strongly with the MPO. They're a great regional organization. Like I said, Rutherford County is part of it, so that connection is kind of important. Is that okay?
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. I'm sorry that I didn't. And if I could running on like with stuff like that, y'all stop me. I mean, I'd be happy to go back and I should have already explained what the MPO was to start with. So, again, as Michelle said, they focus largely on transportation, but the work that they've done, the data they've collected is very, very useful in what we're looking at here as well. So, they have, through their process, preparation, getting ready for their regional modeling, they have prepared a set of population projections, employment projections, their control totals, if you will. Those have already been widely discussed in the region with the county, and there's been an agreement reached that those will be the projections regionally that are looked at. So we're not going to have to go through the process that you sometimes do with these plans in developing our own population projections and then trying to derive our own employment projections. They've used, for example, for employment projections, Woods and Pool, which is among those that use such numbers. That's pretty much as definitive as you can find in terms of projections. So we're not really looking as so much at this point about how can we affect the control, can we increase population, can we decrease it so much? We're sort of taking as a given, at least in these first steps, that the numbers, the projections they've laid out, that's what we'll work with. The growth in population, which I believe to 2040 is projected to be a 90% growth in Rutherford County by 2040. We'll build that into our scenarios. We'll take those numbers of people and the number of jobs to be created, and those are the numbers that within the scenario process will look at where the distribution of those people, where they would be, where those jobs would be, and start to look at it locationally as opposed to just the total. But those totals are broken down by, again, these TAZs, the traffic analysis zones. So what we've shown up here is, on the left, is just, that's the simple map showing the TAZs in the red lines. It also shows lands that are developed and lands that aren't. Green means it's not been developed yet, it's undeveloped land, and the gray or the shaded areas are developed lands. On the right is the future land use that the MPO had projected as part of what they're setting up is the first step of business as usual, a base case scenario. Sort of if nothing changes, if existing trends continue, if you take no actions to make any sort of policy changes, here's how it'll start to look over the time periods in the future. So they have done, just based on existing trends, but also I believe this map had the influence of those small sub-area plans that have been done in the one down in Christiana, the ones out in a Blackman community, their effect as well, but that is their general representation of where the future land uses would go, again, with those TAZs on there.
Could I interject?
Yes,
something?
please do.
Yeah, just on those same lines, when the MPO came up with these projections, if you will, especially that one on the right as you're looking at the screen, basically what they did, all the data that they received came from Rutherford County, basically, as far as the shape files that make up the lines and whatnot, and then the land use plan, the zoning and all that. Basically what they did and they did this for the whole MPO region, not just for Rutherford County. There's a larger map that actually shows the entire Middle Tennessee region that's under Nashville MPO's jurisdiction. Of course, when you look at Rutherford County, the yellow is on that map. It's kind of difficult to see, but the yellow is really indicating single-family growth. The reason for that, and that was kind of unusual across the region, but first thing they did was they looked at any future land use plans that were already done. For instance, Smyrna has a comprehensive plan. The sub-area plans that Tim had mentioned, the Blackman plan, Salem, of course, a couple of the county had done another area plan, as well as the Christiana Buchanan. But they also, in absence of that, looked at just what the zoning allowed for those particular areas. Of course, the vast majority of Rutherford County being zoned R15, that's what you're going to get, is a predominant amount of residential type growth. This really regardless of what the land use plans call for. The zoning allows for basically 3 units an acre if it can meet the subdivision regulations. So that's why. When you look at some of the other counties that maybe have some sort of an agricultural zone or something like that, you may not see all just single-family type growth. You'll have some conservation areas, agricultural areas in there. But that was why when you see Rutherford County, it's predominantly the single-family type growth.
So, anyway, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What about our resources? I'm especially concerned about water.
Yes, sir.
It's like consolidated water service that takes care of most of the county. Murfreesboro City Water System takes care of Murfreesboro.
Yes, sir.
And Murfreesboro and Smyrna, and they come out of Percy Priest Lake. Percy Priest has got a limitation now, which they hadn't reached yet, but they're getting on up there close to it. Murfreesboro is the same way. How close are we to reaching the top end of those resources there?
It's, I don't know the exact how much consumption is left exactly, but I do know just from what we've been told, it's really very, very, very close. So, I mean, and that's a very good point as well, because that ties in with what Denise brought up. Water consumption by household may be one of the measures that we want to try to track across the various scenarios. Although, again, you know, we're sort of taking those growth numbers as a given, but if we can attach to them what the average water consumption for different types of developments are, we can start to see then if these numbers play out, here's the amount of water we would need.
I think we need to consider those figures there some way and work with Consolidated Water, Smyrna Water System, or someone, and find out where our limits are.
Yes,
whether we can increase those limits or whether we're near the top right now. We can't go any further.
Yes, sir. I agree with you.
So if we can't get another industry like Nissan, we can't expect it to expand too much on industrial wise. Nissan uses quite a bit of water.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. That does play into the sort, not only the residential development, but other industrial and commercial development we could bring in, trying to identify those that are not water intensive. Exactly. Okay, where I'm going with this stuff, steering committee, this is where you need to steer me. What we need to do is there are, oh gosh, I've forgotten how many TAZs. There's a bunch. Trying to report data up by TAZ would get very confusing, very cumbersome. So we can't do that. We need to combine them some way. But just reporting data, boom, for the county as a whole, doesn't necessarily give us any differences, and we know different areas of the county are different. We have the cities, we have the areas around the cities, we have the more rural areas. So we need to find a way to break the county up into some sub areas, some study areas. Now, when we did our community meetings, we did 4 of them. We just kind of did a rough quadrant when we did that. It really wasn't based on anything other than create 4 corners so we can have a series of 4 meetings. So what we need to do though here is something that's maybe a little more based on what's on the ground and what we're trying to accomplish. And we've talked to Doug and Elizabeth about this. We've gotten their input into this, and we do know that Doug, for example, was concerned that we look at some of the major corridors as a whole, that if we divide the study areas, let's don't divide that roadway in half and put half the road in one study area, half in the other. Let's identify some of the very major roads, keep them in one main study area. So I agree with that. So what I'm thinking, but again, you're the steering committee, so you're going to tell me, is if we look at these areas, there are some distinctions that I think we can make. What they've advised me, at least for modeling purposes, is let's not run too many of these sub-areas because the modeling gets too cumbersome and we start to lose the distinctions between the different areas if we're comparing 15 sub-areas in the county. And they're saying somewhere 4, 5, 6 in there might be good, just as to see if that works for us. So in looking at these and where we currently have development, don't have development, where the future development is sort of predicted to go, but then also just the general location of where the cities are in the county. The red line are the urban growth boundaries around the cities. That it's still unincorporated territory. That's county territory. Well, it's all county territory, but it's unincorporated territory. But it's also within the urban growth boundaries, which means it's within the reach of each of the municipalities, provided they meet certain conditions and all. They can annex those territories, but those lands inside that red boundary start to be tied more to the cities than to the rural areas. So what I'm thinking is 4 to 5 study areas. One, we have our main municipal corridor, right? Coming out of Davidson into the county, Laverne, Smyrna, Murfreesboro, all lined up in a row. So what I'm thinking is that we basically consider that one big municipality. We're not trying to do a land use plan from Laverne, Smyrna, and Murfreesboro, which I'm sure they're probably happy, grateful for, but they have their own planning processes, but they are a large chunk of the land and of the activity. So what I'm thinking is would probably work best is again to see those 3 in a row on the interstate as one unit to themselves. The growth boundaries, because again they are those areas that are within the reach of the municipalities, they could conceivably be annexed and taken in, and therefore would be subject to being under city services. Just because the way they're arranged, and that your growth boundaries are contiguous, and they all touch each other there, and again, I'm just talking about the 3 on 24, not Eagleville yet, but the 3 on 24, those growth boundaries, the areas around the cities, might just make a distinct study area themselves. Now again, the reason I keep going to this TAZ map is wherever we draw the lines, I really want to try to stay on those TAZ boundaries. So it's like if you ever have to mess with the censuses, if you split census blocks, it drives everybody crazy. You don't split a block. So here we're going to try the same thing. Let's don't split a TAZ if we can help it, just because it's going to be easier to report data and compare it back. So, it'd be a rough approximation of the urban growth boundaries, but again, I'm thinking that those 3 cities' growth boundaries together form a distinct geographic area, but also again for reporting purposes, as we're going to pull data up and test scenarios and do different things within the county, that would be a distinct area in and of itself that could be reported on. 24 south, as well as 231 down into Bedford County. If we go back to the future land use map, you can see that you start to get, they expect a continuation of growth along the corridors. You can see them going down both highways. So those would seem to be, at least along that general area, those where the growth will be concentrated, where the non-residential growth may well be concentrated. So what I'm thinking is that again, going along those TAZ boundaries, is that we reduce the cities, reduce the growth boundaries as a unit, that we maybe something like this, again following TAZ boundaries where we catch the interstate, the properties along the interstate, and the adjacent roadways, as well as 231. Look at that as sort of our commercial corridor or our intense development corridor to the south and east. So I'm thinking, boundary, study area. Okay, that leaves this part of the county that you're seeing is pretty much, look at the existing development and the projected development. See some growth in non-residential, but you have some other areas in here that are sensitive. I know that's where, she left. Landfill is up in this area. But it's a suburbanizing area to an extent. You've got, still fairly rural Wilson County over here, pretty rural Cannon County. Cannon County over here. But anyway, we've got a growth, we have a study area that takes in this, and we from here down as part of this. I think this makes a decent study area in and of itself to report data on. That leaves the southwest corner around Eagleville. This area, as you can see, will probably be among the slower growing areas, just simply because of the proximity off the interstate, the relative isolation to the rest of the county. But you do have Eagleville itself, obviously an incorporated city, with an urban growth boundary. But I'm thinking that it bears more of a relationship really to the surrounding rural area than it does, obviously to cities. So kind of what I'm thinking then again, with the cities, and now I've got to talk to modelers about this too, because they may find that it's best that we include the cities with their growth boundaries as opposed to just creating one city, a separate one. Either way though, I'm thinking for our study purposes, we match the growth boundaries. It's one, these highway corridors together. It's two, southwest corner. It's one, and up here as a study area. Now again, these study areas really just exist for the life of the plan in any real sense, because that's how, again, we'll be pulling together and looking at these areas as a group. Once the plan is done, I mean, we're not creating new jurisdictions or anything. Again, this is just to help organize the plan, but you know, I don't want to take that step to go ahead and do a quadrant or do whatever we want to do without you all looking at this and thinking about it and telling me if you think this sounds reasonable. If you've got other suggestions or ideas, you know, that's what I want to hear. But that's sort of a starting point, because again, our folks have been working hard for a long time, and they've got a ton of data pulled together, and they've been working back and forth with the MPO to make sure that it's consistent with what they've got. And now they're just waiting on me to tell them, okay, we've got it. Now what do we do? What do we do with it? How do you want it reported? How do you want us to pull it together and start delivering it to you? So this would be our first step, study boundaries. What do you think?
Makes sense to me.
Makes sense to me.
One.
Makes sense to me.
Do you use a roadway or some rural roadway to break those? Do you have an absolute breaking line?
Well, again, I want to try to stay on. Well, I did, and I have one kind of sketched out. It's just my working copy. I'm going to do what y'all want. But yes, but again, these TAC boundaries, they're always on roads, aren't they?
Most of the time they follow fairly major or some minor collector roads, arterial roads, or major geographic boundaries if there happens to be a stream or a railroad, other physical features that are a clear break point for where your transportation, the way that you travel shifts. But generally, yes, they're on roadways.
But doing it like this, again, allows us to keep John Gregg Highway at both sides, the properties on both sides, and the feeder roads in one study area to itself, and again, 231 and the interstate as a unit, and as well as 99 as one unit.
840 is that big red blob directly to the north. Yeah. But you've got all that out. Looks like out. I guess it is. That's Lebanon Highway 231. The red up there. I guess is that where the VA and all that is growth around that. Right.
I think that's that big red blob. I think that's Jefferson Pike, and then that area. I think right in there. Yeah.
Yeah, because we're already seeing it. There's already development footprints there.
Yeah, projections.
All the way up to,
I thought it was like 40.
Well, again, you know, I might have to maybe do a little adjusting just to keep on those boundaries, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, something, I think what you sketched out makes pretty good sense, but I want to understand something about how when we're working with these blocks of land that we've set out. So we're kind of starting from a base idea that we're not going to influence total population growth, which is fine with me.
At least starting.
Yeah, that's fine with me, because I think it's going to be, it'd be pretty tough to have much impact on it. Recession, but for us to have any impact on it. But so if you've got your what I'm concerned about is we've got the urban growth boundaries in a zone, and so our assumptions about rates of growth and types of growth inside those, which potentially are higher, they have a better potential for being higher growth because of the flexibility of the cities versus the county on their zonings. So that will then reflect back out to what we assume about those rural pieces. Is that correct?
Yes, and that'll be part of the exercise that we go through at the next meeting, where once we kind of settle on some scenario themes, that the exercise will actually be to take the development that's planned over the next however many years and start to move it around. Because what the MPO and when we've been working with them on how they've done their growth projections is really not They've not done any particular trends that vary by geography. It's just sort of a, we hook on to the present and just keep building on it for the future. They've not done anything as far as I know in particular, except maybe for Smyrna's land use plan has some influence. They didn't really get into the fact, okay, these are urban growth boundaries, they're going to be more intense and we'll drive more of that growth into there to see what the effect is. That's what we're going to do.
Okay.
Got me back in.
If you're going to be standing up there, they probably can't hear you.
Well, I could just sit down and use it, whatever. So anyway, do a sound, you okay with the study areas? I mean, again, this is just for our purposes within the plan and reporting data, but, I wanted it to, again, kind of reflect sort of realities on the ground as opposed to just trying not to be arbitrary with how we do our study areas. So that, you okay if I flesh something out along those lines? Okay. Well, that just gets us to how we'll conduct the data analysis. Now, as I pointed out, for data purposes, we're going to stay at that TAZ level. Now, when we get down to looking at some of these a little more specifics on where within the county different types of development will go, we don't have to stay on those boundaries then. When we sketch out scenarios at our next meeting, that can be down to a pretty precise level, nothing below really a parcel level. We can take it down to that level if you want to get that precise, because that's how they'll digitize it, code it in to the system. They've got the partial data. So while a lot of the population and employment data is at that TAZ level, they've got data down at partial level. So we'll be able to get pretty precise, as precise as you think you need to be, and you might not want to be too. We're trying to find a balance between a high-level study and, specific building plan, so that we'll be able to take it down below that TAZ level for scenario purposes.
Tim, when you go down to that level, what kind of data do you have? Will we have data on, just looking at those categories that you've got up there, more specific land uses where some of the historical points of interest are, or something that might be a potential consideration for conservation?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that'll be, I plan on bringing back, oh, this works now, doesn't it? No? No? Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Well, what I want to do is bring back for the scenario workshop, basically print out pretty much everything we've got that we've been developing so far as part of the existing conditions report, and there's even information I have that's not in that report.
Like topographic characteristics.
Floodplains, all of this, the environmental features. We'll have the layout of the protected lands, the ones that the state manages that are protected areas, the historic properties, any potential historic properties such as, or even just keeping in mind where, say, the Trail of Tears went. I why I have that in there, where the Trail of Tears passed through Rutherford County, and just note where that is, even if we're not really parcel specific with it, but note where it comes through the county. But we'll bring all of that stuff into play so that when we kind of get through an understanding of what our terms are going to be and what tools we're going to use to build the scenarios, then we'll bring in that information for the workshop showing how to build the scenarios. Is that great? Okay. For the scenario planning, think about this. I've been a planner for a long time, and I've done this in different forms in different places. But the effort we're going through has to mesh again with the computer modeling. It needs to make it effective anyway. I mean, we could leave things fairly inexact if we had to, but in order for the modeling to be effective, for us to get our best bang for the buck, I want to try to make sure that what we do feeds right back into what they're doing. That's one of the reasons we're sort of breaking this up into two sessions, because I need to go back then, talk with the modelers once we've got a general idea of some themes we want to use. They're going to start sketching me out some things that I can bring back. We'll use in the workshop, then I take it back to them, and they start the really specific modeling and start producing spreadsheets and information for us. So, again, we've got somewhat of an advantage because the MPO has worked in the area on some basic terms and basic forms that they're looking at in their counties. We're not, again, really, we're not wedded to those, but if at all possible, I'd like to stay with them simply because it would show some consistency with how the data is being studied and analyzed for the area. But still, this is going to be customized to you all, and it's going to be areas and terms that you understand and support. But didn't see any reason to start, invent a new wheel when they've got one that's round and rolls. So what the MPO has worked on, and this is nothing unique to this area, these are some pretty standard and general terms and concepts that are used in a lot of places, is different types, character types, which describe sort of the broad form and composition of different parts of the county. And what we've got here, general urban character, a suburban character, rural, conservation character. What these generally means, and David and others jump in and add your experience to this as well. General urban character, those areas that have a mix of uses that are in close proximity to each other with a certain density level and a general street layout and a general feel, if you will, to the area that creates that you recognize as an urban environment. Again, one that has a mixture of uses and a variety of activities, employment, and housing opportunities in proximity to each other. A suburban character, one that still could have a range of uses, but they're generally grouped together, maybe with large residential areas and then a small commercial area, but a lower density, more spread out, but still all the land has pretty well been converted to a use other than open space. Rural character, those areas with extremely low density, relatively, because all this is, it's relative to your county. Rural, a lower density, much far fewer types of uses within the area, again, generally residential and some agricultural activities. This scattered light commercial use or service use or maybe some public facilities in the area, but still very, very low densities. Conservation character areas, and those areas that could include, say, those that are environmentally sensitive, areas of bad slope, poor soils for development, certainly floodplains, but also then those areas that either by design or by nature are going to remain rural or going to remain open and undeveloped for the foreseeable future. And it may be lands that are under an easement of some type or lands that, that are just being held outside of the development arena. They're just not up for development. Is that fair explanation? So these are sort of the general character types that have been discussed in the region. I think we can probably, if you picture the type of developments you got in Rutherford County and how things are spread out, I think we could probably put the county, all of the county, under one of these headings. And I kind of had that in mind again as I was looking at how to do the study areas. So, I think that's something strong that you consider. We can do variations again on these, and certainly you can define what you can call something a suburban area, but then we've got a chance to assign the attributes to it that we like. We put a density level we like into what we think is suburban in Rutherford County and the mix of uses we think is appropriate, but still along the lines of, the large blocks of single uses and relatively low density. And the MPO's initial run of some of their data showed the existing character areas in Rutherford County. And it's, again, very broad brush here with sort of an urban core, downtown, Murfreesboro forming the heart of the density of the development in the county, the general urban pattern of Murfreesboro itself, and Laverne and Smyrna's density just didn't quite reach the level to hit that character, but they're in the general suburban development pattern. And again, they're probably, how you define it, that might or might not trigger them over to a little more urban level. But, again, still, and you see we're roughly still in our growth boundary, roughly. And then the remainder of the county, though, as a rural character area. So that's sort of the existing. Yeah, please, page it down. And then, okay, and then this is where, they did, yeah, I did have this in here, where they looked at the future land uses and how that could impact the character areas as well. So again, you're building on what they did before. You've got your urban core, and then the general urban nature area of Murfreesboro, suburban area of the remainders, but you can see the suburban, the intensity and the density starting to spread out. And if I overlaid that with that future land use map that they did, I think you would see then that we had little pockets of intensification coming out 99, down the highways, and even out that way, and the rest of it largely rural around the fringes of the county, as you would expect, just given how the county's laid out and what you've got on the other sides of you. So that's kind of how the character areas are applied. You see they're in broad brush swaths of land, but they're still distinctive, and you still know what they are, in differentiation to each other. Okay. They're different. They're different. Again, themes as they've been described to me that you prepare the scenarios in for modeling purposes, and some of the ones that have been discussed in the area again, and a couple of them that I think probably will work for you all, but we'll see what you think, are dealing with how you want to take the future development and structure it in the county or in your community physically. Where do we put it? What kind of mixed uses do we have? Keeping in mind these general character areas, but within them you can do all kinds of different things. And one of the concepts that's promoted is a center concept, that you have centers of activity in your community. And those centers could be residential, they could be employment centers. There are, well, in fact, these are the center types, but they are the points of concentration, different sizes and all, but they're the point of concentration for development. A traditional town center, such as you would have in downtown Murfreesboro, where you've got the core of the community, again, buildings in close proximity to each other, no street buildings on the street front, and a wide mix of uses. A village or neighborhood center, and that is actually how they had labeled, I believe, Eagleville in their initial run, looking at future land use, was that just given the size of Eagleville, that it serves as a focal point. It's not that urban level, but it's a village or a neighborhood center still has some mix of uses at a much smaller scale and serves a smaller area and smaller population. Major activity centers, again, those spots where there's an activity concentrated there, it may not be necessarily just a development activity per se, like a large shopping center, but I mean, the airport is an activity center. The landfill could be an activity center. It's a large footprint on the county or on the community that takes place, a single sort of use on one spot, one area that has an impact on the surrounding area. The major employment centers, and that may be, well, the airport could also be considered a major employment center because it's one spot where a large number of jobs concentrated, an industrial park or even one large facility itself could be looked at as a major employment center. And then transit-oriented developments, those types of developments that are geared toward starting to accommodate non-automobile traffic or other modes of traffic than the automobile. And we really don't have any examples of transit-oriented developments in Middle Tennessee or really in Tennessee as far as I know, because again, they're geared toward transit, which is, but even as evidence today, is taking steps forward in the state, but we don't quite have it there. Transit-oriented developments would concentrate jobs and housing in one spot that's also got accommodations for either rail or bus or whatever your various your transit option is going to be, but also it's heavily focused on pedestrian movement as well. So those are some of the general center types. Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. That have been discussed, and here's kind of how it. Here's a generic graphic that gives you an idea of what they mean by centers. But this adds another layer on top of it. Now, because centers in and of themselves can be a scenario type, where you look at both your existing development and those areas. What did I do?
No, nothing. That one's just the center.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's good. Where you've got just existing development and you're trying to force, if you will, direct future development, like a magnet, to where you've already got or wish to develop new centers. And again, the various type of centers, whether it's the large urban core with some surrounding employment centers and other assorted major activity centers. But again, the idea being that you're concentrating the uses, therefore the services to serve them, in one spot with the areas around them distinct and different in that they are much lower density, probably in some sort of conservation character area, but if not, at least certainly not developed to the level of the centers. But in addition to the centers, you can also have centers and corridors where you have your existing and future activity concentrations. But then also the idea that those areas that given the geography, given the way that existing development has already taken place, those areas are not freestanding. They are connected by the major corridors of the area, the major transportation routes. So under this scenario, you concentrate growth, you do concentrate development into the centers and the nodes, but also along those corridors, connecting the nodes. So again, you're maybe pulling some of the development pressure off those center and outlying properties and onto those major corridors, again, where you can concentrate service deliveries. And yes, and again, that works into supporting multiple transportation modes. And again, I think given the emphasis that's being placed on transit development in this area and the amount of money that's going to be available over the next however many years to support planning for and the implementation of transit plans, I think is something we need to keep in mind as we look at our future development. How can we take advantage of that? There's a regional initiative taking place. How can we take advantage of that in Rutherford County and as we lay out the future plans? So centers and corridors. I don't think I put any other ones in here, but a couple of other ones that are used and have been used in Middle Tennessee, a conservation focus, where there really will be very few, if any, new centers of development planned, but growth is directed toward those existing ones of different sizes and types, but that the lands in between are really, really low density, really non-developed lands. Where you have large agricultural operations, large-scale environmental concerns over large areas of your community. That might be one that's worth at least building and testing. Another one is infill type development, and it would probably be more appropriate for where you got much more urbanized areas, where you really do drive development both into vacant infill properties, but also looking at potential for redevelopment of existing properties, where you had some old communities, where you had some brownfield areas maybe, that maybe with enough environmental constraints in the rest of the county, it's worth looking at those areas for their potential to tear down and build over, as well as filling in. So I mean, it's another scenario type that can be built and tested against whatever measures we want to put on it. So go again, see what I've got. I may be about the centers, and okay. And really, this was sort of my ending slide on that, was just again showing the initial projections the MPO has done of your future land use locations. So I guess what I'm hoping to take away from this is, if you can give me a sense of a couple of these scenario types that you think sound reasonable for Rutherford County, what I want to do is go back to our modeling folks, have them start to sketch these out, what they could look like, But what we really want to do at the next work session is build some tools and some materials to bring back to let you all, what we want to do is actually change the room up, or wherever we meet, have working tables. Take some maps of the community, of the county. Maybe I'll have some by then printed out by these sub areas. And we'll bring you in some different, I'm not going to say how. We're going to bring in some different, I've got a couple of ideas on how to actually start building scenarios on the map. We'll take, take the development that's projected for us, start moving it around on the papers based on these scenario themes, based on our chosen scenario themes, and try to get this down specific enough that we can send that back to the modelers, have them run those as actual scenarios through the process. We'll have developed some proposed measures of effectiveness by then. Again, I'm looking back at your goals that you've set, as well as the economic overview that Dr. Penn has provided, as well as some additional fiscal information that he's going to be pulling together that gets down into your budget. He probably knows your budget as well as anybody in the room. And so we're going to get his advice on how your past fiscal house has been working, how the trends have been looking with your different budget expenditures compared to your population growth, and then we'll look at how the future development impacts those trends. But anyway, that'll be the result of building these scenarios. We run it back through the system, and they show us the comparison, how the scenarios affect those measures. So, hi, yes, Lenise.
I have a question. When you go through that process of looking at the amount of development that we're going to have, do you know what kind of development, we're going to have an influx of another 100,000 people. Do we know what they're looking for when they come here in terms of how they want to live, where they want to live, so that we have some idea, how much of this kind and that kind is it realistic to expect to be able to have to place in different places on the map?
Well, I'll tell you this. Here's how they did the initial projections are done, or are being done through the modeling that's been done. They took all of the parcels in the county, in all these counties, and they ranked them for suitability for development. Now that doesn't get into necessarily what people look, because I don't know how you'd project, how you'd find out exactly what the people who might be looking, because they might even be they're not even born yet in some cases, but what they have looked at is, well, just what in all likelihood, how will the area develop just based on these suitability factors? Came up with 13 suitability factors that varied from presence of water, presence of sewer, distance to transit stop, poor soils, presence of floodplain, and proximity to existing development was one of the suitability factors. And they ran their initial models on these factors to show the likelihood of different parcels developing in different ways. Not all those suitability factors, they were done for the whole region. And not all of those are going to be as applicable here as in others. I don't think out in Eagleville they're going to be worried about distance transit stops as much as they might have we got water to support development. So I'm talking with our people about maybe taking some of those suitability factors and using just some of them for us, weighting them maybe, giving some weight to one factor or another, and test the models that way. But I think it would be hard to predict what the extra 100,000 people are looking for. But I think we can at least look at, based on past trends, what seems to have been those factors that influence where people went and what they seem to be looking for. I mean, we'll do the best we can with the modeling. It's not predictive quite like I think you're asking.
And I think Tim kind of mentioned it before, but I think what we'd be looking to do is take the goals and objectives that you all have identified, that we've heard from the public meetings, take those and say, okay, we may not know what other people are going to be looking for in the future, but this is what we've heard, and this is what we're looking for. So let's take what we're looking for. We have that vision for how we want to see Rutherford County look in the future, and then take these scenarios and test them against that. Some of the ones that Tim was talking about. If you want to have areas where you would preserve the rural character, keep some conservation areas, you could look at identifying certain parts of Rutherford County where you want to keep that, and you can. And when we say the growth is related to, obviously, the population and employment. So we might take, if we have a control total of 100,000 more people we're going to see, you might say, well, let's look at what taking 70% of the people and putting them in areas where we've identified for corridors and nodal development, putting them in that area. And you can identify across those nodes, some might be in urban, so they'd be more intense, more mixed-use development. Some might be more of the hamlet type, so you'd have a lower intensity there. But you'd still be focusing the bulk of the population and employment into those certain areas and seeing what the implications would be, how much it would cost to support them, what would be the implication on the amount of land that you're using up. Would you have impacts on rivers and streams? Or, also you could take a scenario and you could identify, well, and we'd probably want to do it in multiple scenarios, where are the areas of topography that you don't really want to build on? Where are those sensitive environmental features, and kind of build around that? So you might want to hold those in kind of conservation and say, these are areas that we think are important. We'd rather focus the growth over here, over here. You could do a scenario that's, like Tim had talked about, was very high conservation, doing a lot of urban development in maybe 5% of the land. Total extreme example. But what it's starting to do is being able to compare what the costs and the revenues would be for each of the type of the developments. And I think we had talked at one point about developing some sort of matrix. So it puts all of the goals and objectives that you've identified into some sort of table where you can say, okay, in this scenario, we have these certain measures that we're looking at. It would have this impact across here, and you could have kind of a table that compare the different scenarios. And it's more, some of them would be quantitative, some of them would be qualitative, but the scenario planning is a very broad, you can do a lot of different things with it. And Tim's kind of giving you, I think what we're asking right now is a very difficult question. We're saying, what kinds of scenarios do you want us to be looking at? Are you comfortable with focusing things on corridors and nodes? Are you looking at doing like a heavy preservation area? Do you want to see just, this is how we've been growing, let's look at that as a comparison point?
Right. Because again, what you select at the end may be an amalgamation of a couple of them, but for the testing purposes, I think each of the scenarios need to be their own distinct theme, again, that we can run those numbers on, as Michelle noted, and really let you see the difference between handling the development numbers in one way versus another, spatially, geographically, even. So, any reactions so far? Does anything jump out at you in what we've pointed out? I mean, because again, I've got an idea of what I think would make some good scenario themes to test against, but I mean, this goes back to the goals, and I hate to keep going back to that step, but that really is the foundation for everything else. Those goals were done for a reason, and they were done to help you build a future scenario that fulfills them. So keeping that in mind, and then some of what I'm talking about here, does this start to sound, or are there other types of themes that you want me to look into and bring you back some information on?
Yeah, and Randy is raising a good point too. One of the things that we'll look at if we say a corridor and node development, well, what we can look at changing the different types of uses within there, whether you want to identify a corridor that's an industrial corridor versus a retail corridor versus a mixed-use corridor. So we have the ability to play a lot with the difference. You could really take one scenario and change it up tremendously just based on the types of uses that you put in it and the intensity of development that you allow. And again, the whole purpose of this is just to play with the outcomes. What impacts are we going to have on Rutherford County if we develop, X through X, Y, Z? What are the differences in them?
I think what you're trying to say, this is a starting point. Tim. This is a starting point from which you can build from here. We got to have something to start from, and that's, I think, what we're looking for direction today. And then there's going to be many opportunities to move that around based on those case scenarios that you start with.
But I'm trying to start with the themes now because, again, I want to engage the folks that are doing our modeling right now. I don't want to waste any movements or any motions with them. So as I feed them information, it's stuff they can use, and I'm trying to keep in mind their data needs. At the same time, really, the more important issue is what do you all want? But I want to be able to give you back the information accurately once we've decided that. So
Well, and now going all the way back to one of your early slides showing the urban, suburban, rural characterization, I'm assuming there's a whole sort of thesaurus of criteria that match up with those.
Well, there is in a sense. I mean, again, this is, they're general types, but the specifics about them, the densities, or U dwelling units per acre, or whatever, we can customize to what you are, to what you consider urban is not what downtown, it's not what Manhattan would consider urban, obviously. But in a relative sense, it's still the same. So, but yes, and there are a lot of different ways to describe these, but yes, you have specifics that are carried forward when you apply them to the ground.
Well, that's certainly something that I'd be interested in. It's one of the things I've thought could be a good outcome from this is that the urban parts of our community end up being really good urban, which doesn't mean super dense, but with a lot of the kind of services that you associate with a walkable urban, lots of opportunities for different types of businesses and so forth, going all the way out to that continuum of a rural and then a conservation. And so those would certainly be a starting point, but then obviously you're going to have some kind of centering in each one of those.
Probably.
Would it be possible to take some of the existing or previously existing small communities that people still identify with, like Kittrell, Las Casas, Salem, and so forth, and do a scenario that says, well, what if these little places begin to grow, and we want to encourage growth around those so that we don't lose Kittrell, we don't lose Salem, and to the extent that maybe they align with transportation corridors, you might show some of them as being a little more densely populated, a little more commercial activity or something in them. Is that the kind of thing that you're?
I think you're really hitting the nail on the head. If you look at the history of Rutherford County, it is centers connected by corridors. The centers are changing, the corridors are developing quickly, but in terms of the models that we should use to test some scenarios, we've got some we have some historical centers that have somewhat faded a little bit, that are good opportunities to maintain and preserve character and have them be more denser centers of population. And there's a well-developing corridor network. Let's work within that well-established framework to use that as the basis for developing scenarios. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel, because the development character and pattern in this county is pretty understandable. And I think that's a good platform to build some alternatives from. And as Randy said, maybe the corridors, they don't come in just flavor A, but they can be variations on land use type and land use densities. The same with the centers. They're not just all one size meets all, but they can be different based upon their ability to accept and absorb populations and growth and the inherent nature of those centers. So the center corridor model fits pretty well with where you have been and what we have heard in some of the meetings about strengthening the centers that have been our historic communities around the county. That's probably a good strategy for moving into the next phase.
I think another support of that is a lot of those major corridors like 231, 96, or 99 are state highways. So you would have additional support and revenues to help develop those corridors. If you develop those centers like Las Casas and Salem and Rockvale, if you could encourage, and that village that you said that Eagleville is, could be at Rockvale, could be at Las Casas.
Absolutely. Yes, Jim?
Kind of an observation. I would think that the first step is to identify places that have to be conserved for geological reasons or historical reasons or whatever, and mark those out. And then we need to concentrate on what we talked about early in the meeting, the importance of the industrial and the commercial for employment to get that tax base up. We obviously got the population now to help where it's attractive for those. So let's capitalize on that and create opportunities for those. Those are most likely going to be on the areas with existing infrastructure, like you mentioned, the highway system. But we have to keep in mind, where is sewer now, and where can sewer be expanded fairly easily? Obviously, the hilly parts of the county are not your best places for it. So identify those to put your commercial, and then you can start putting your little nodes around the kittrels and the little areas for the villages and the little small commercial centers and that sort of thing for neighborhood shopping, so people don't necessarily have to come into Murfreesboro. I don't think the county, Rutherford County, has done a good enough job historically in encouraging small retail places, sales tax generating places outside the city limits, and as a result, businesses find that it's easier to get approvals in the city, so that's where they end up gravitating to, so they can be annexed easily, so that they can have more freedom than the counties allow. So I think we need to be sensitive to that. If we want to keep that tax revenue in the county and not have to split it with the municipalities, we need to make it attractive for them to want to come out here.
Well, it's one of the values of keeping in mind where those urban growth boundaries are in the cities, for the cities, because again, that's somewhat of a bright line that, absent going through the amendment process, that there is an absolute boundary beyond which the municipalities will not be able to extend their boundaries by annexation. So you'll have a sense of which of those either existing or maybe future centers that if you put some investment into them, they're going to be able to return that investment to the county for foreseeable future, because they're not within that immediate reach of the communities of the cities. That leads toward a scenario type that we could build and test or have you all work with at the next workshop, and that is something that leans toward the undeveloped areas being conserved, heavy conservation, just for testing purposes, to see what would happen if the densities were greatly reduced in those areas that are off the corridors, that are away from the centers, and that either have environmental constraints or maybe they don't. As David pointed out in the review of the Farmland Trust studies on the cost of community services studies, they dispel that myth that, open space land is just in a holding pattern waiting for some sort of development to snatch it up. But that an open space, agricultural land, even forest land, is a use in its own right that has a purpose and a place within the county, just like the developed areas do. It's just they don't look like the developed areas, but they still function, and they still provide a benefit, tourism-wise, as well as just quality of life benefits to the communities, and they do not consume cost for services. So, I mean, that could be one of the scenario types we test, is where we build on just the existing areas of the county, the nodes, and keep the rest of it in pretty heavy conservation mode of some kind. And again, we're not talking about developing a plan that we then, boom, the next day it goes on the ground. You don't go from A to Z. You go from A to B. And these lay out a long-term future vision, so it's something you work toward, you don't make happen. But I think that might be a viable scenario to test, to build and test, and maybe test it against one that looks at the centers and nodes connected by corridors, where we come up with the land off of the corridors is maybe not held not so much of it held in conservation. You could still have some of the low density pattern that you've got, but by making the corridors more attractive for development, you kind of naturally force that growth into those corridors. So I mean, but those would be two types that we could build and test against the measures, just to see what the effects are. I don't know, other thoughts?
I think we still need to go back to seeing things like what are our limits as far as water? And can we afford sewage for, say, Rockvale, all the way to Rockvale or something like that? The city of Murfreesboro afford to ever put a sewer line. Now, they've got one, I think, partly out there to the school, but can they afford to put it out there for the general population? And I hear a lot of things, too, about people say, don't take a value Don't take the value of my land away from me. Don't take my land and just restrict it where I can't use it. Leave my property rights alone. That's one thing that's come out of these public hearings. Big thing I've heard. People are concerned about them. Now, we may have to get into that. I don't know. It's not going to be our final decision. It's going to be the county commission. The way it's going to be the final decision. I don't know. Hope I don't get into that.
Well, you know, and that's one of the values of this sort of scenario process is it just assigns a value to things, and you decide if that value is worth it to you or not. Continuing to allow, you know, the three dwelling unit per acre development across the county is certainly something you can do, and it's really what the sort of baseline scenario is built to do. But what we do in this process, we put a cost on it, and then what you decide as a community is that a cost yes, the individual has the ability to gain value off this land, but there is a cost built in for everyone else. Is that okay with us? And that's part of what this scenario process does. It just lays it out there, puts the numbers down, and you decide, yeah, we'll buy that or we won't. So, yes, the scenarios kind of lead us into that sort of discussion, Mr. Johns. But you know, again, it's not saying one's good, one's bad. It's just here's what they are and compare them.
Another item I ran into some at the public hearings was people want parks. The county can't afford parks. They don't have any park system. They don't have any means to develop a park. But just because you don't have the means, do you just ignore it and just like a highway. If you go, you know, you go have to 4-lane the highway through the property sometime. You just ignore it and leave the right of way off. So you designate a right of way across that property for a future expansion of a highway. I think we need to think about that direction too. Maybe.
Yes, sir.
Think of the parks and acquire the land. Even though we don't have a park system, we don't have any kind of maintenance, we don't have any personnel. But we wait until the last minute and then decide, well, we've got to have some parks and go buy them then.
Exactly. That's a great point. And that's one of the reasons that we in the goals and objectives, that we got into looking at, say, where the existing school sites are. That's a major capital investment, it's a major part of your budget. And trying to build on where the schools already are and where the expansion plans are. What other things could we do around them that maybe looks at future park space, greenways and whatnot, and use those schools as the community anchors that they are to kind of start to focus growth around them. That also can, and we'll certainly work with the school board on this, how that affects their projections and their potential enrollment numbers if we kind of help start to concentrate growth into depending on where the school zones are. So,
I think that we're getting enough feedback to be able to understand some of the framework you're going to ask us to do the next step, and that is for ways to look at developing a couple of scenarios to test. And we'll link them back to what we heard on the goals and objectives and the way the county has developed and the clear desire to protect sensitive natural areas and other areas of distinction within the county while looking for opportunities for building employment opportunities and the right balance of residential growth, trying to preserve our historic community centers, all the various things that we've talked about at multiple times in this process. I think that we understand those well enough to be able to put some ideas on the map and be able to give you some feedback on what that means for different choices in Rutherford County. Let's allocate the growth in ways that make the most sense and line up best with the goals that we've talked about, and then see what the implications of that are and get your feedback on that. That's the best way to have the next conversation about this and really start to see what this makes some sense. This doesn't make sense for the county, so we can kind of work towards that preferred scenario that we can hopefully use as the kernel for writing the comprehensive plan. Does that sound like a good path forward?
I think that's what we're up here to try to do. They're talking about parks. I don't think we need to talk about parks as such. We're talking about just maybe leaving the land, say someone wants to buy 100 acres. Make the plans where some of the land, say if it's nothing more than 2 acres or 1 acre, be enough for young kids, 5-year-olds. We can't build golf courses in all of every park, I know that. We can't build a 100-acre park like Smyrna's able to do. But the 5-year-olds deserve a park as much as anybody, maybe more so.
That's a good comment, Chairman. You all have been very generous and very patient with your time tonight, talking about data and ideas, and I think it's time to start showing more things and getting your feedback on things to put some roots in the ground about what this plan can start to look like. And that is where we will go together next. So thanks for hanging in there with us for a long, somewhat
David, we need a date.
meeting.
At this point, before the meeting, we kind of talked amongst ourselves about a possible date. We identified tentatively March the 9th as a possibility. Now, we'll confirm that, and, you know, we need to come up with location. The format we're looking to do at that meeting will be a little different than this here tonight. So we, you know, if this room would be available, I know that they can take the partition out and they can set up tables. There's different ways to do that. But we'll work through that at this point. Just to check your calendars and just to see if that would work. I think that was a Tuesday, if I remember right. And and we'll be in touch with you probably within the next couple, either tomorrow or even early next week, to try to start shoring that up. Just to see if because if that date's not going to work with several of the committee members, we might check for something else. But we're trying to keep it really within the next month. You know, we don't want to wait a long time for this next meeting. So we'll be in touch with that. But tentatively, let's go ahead and March 9th will be the date. If you could check your calendars, and we'll be in touch with you about that.
If you need copies of anything else that if you'll let Doug know, we keep him in plenty of copies of things as well as electronic versions, and he's, needs to sort of be the point of contact to distribute stuff around. I mean, I'm always happy to talk to you, answer questions, but if you need copies of anything, either let him know or let me know, and we'll get them out to you. I think everything's pretty well on the website.
One thing real quick, Dr. Penn, thank you for the handout. It's clear, concise, and full of facts.
Yes,
and I appreciate it.
I'd like to recognize one of the members of the county commission here, Jim Daniels. If he's got any comment, I'd like to give him an opportunity to say anything.
I was here to listen. I really appreciate what's being done. That's all I've got to say.
And I'd like to say, I think we've all had our depth of understanding greatly enhanced tonight. You've given us a lot of information and presented very well. Michelle, your background on some of the things that, filled out what Tim was saying was excellent. So thank you very much.
That's why we're a good team.
Yeah.
We're a good team, all of us.
It shows.
Well, what else we got?
Adjourn.
Adjourn?
Yeah.
Are you all ready?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, you adjourn.
That's your stress.